I want to follow the other guests, the other speakers in reaffirming their thanks that they offered you for being here. I was in Iraq when the genocide began. I was with Yazidis on that day, remember it quite clearly. From that time until now, for almost 5 years, I have spoken at countless events like this. It has been an emotionally depleting experience, and often when I see the lack of action and the lack of change to the Yazidi situation, I want to just stop and back away from this. And yet I keep doing these events. Every time I'm asked, I find it impossible to say no, because there's a voice inside my head that says maybe this will be the meeting where something changes. Maybe it will be this meeting where the right person is sitting in the audience who hears about the Yazidi situation and says, I have to take action, and they make the difference. The fact that we have a whole room full of people tonight, it gives me hope. And I'm really glad that you're taking your evening to spend it with us to talk about this situation. I've been quite fortunate to have traveled to many countries across 4 continents. Today is special for me, however, because in fact this is my first time to the UK. And that's special because this is the land of many of my ancestors. A great number of people around the world, many of whom have never traveled here, think of this country as a kind of historical and cultural homeland, since it is the place of their origins. And how much more an important homeland is it for those who are born and have lived here their entire lives? Historic homelands are important not only because they connect us to our pasts, but also because they ground our present and frame our future. Sinjar is this kind of homeland for the Yazidis. There are Yazidi communities in Armenia, Syria, Georgia, Russia, and now growing communities in Europe and North America. But all of these look to the Yazidi areas of Iraq as their cultural center. Imagine if Britain, with all its historical richness and cultural heritage, was suddenly taken away and no longer existed. This is what the Yazidis are experiencing. They have lost most of their historic homelands over several centuries, and now are desperately clinging to the few tiny enclaves that they still have, but even these are at risk of being lost forever. And the world is doing very little to help the Yazidis retain them. One of the topics we're raising tonight is the issue of asylum and immigration, and I agree with the other speakers that Britain should accept more Yazidis. But in my opinion, there is a far more crucial need area, and that is to help resolve the political conflict inside of Iraq that is preventing the Yazidis from returning to their homeland in Sinjar. The immigration and asylum problem exists in the first place because Sinjar is neither stable nor secure, and this is what most needs to be addressed: the future of the Yazidis in their own country. Tonight I am going to propose my idea for an international commission that would work with Iraq to stabilize Sinjar, making it possible for Yazidis to finally leave the camps they have inhabited for nearly 5 years and return home and resume their lives. Now, Sinjar is one of Iraq's internal disputed territories, areas that are not part of the Kurdistan region, but which the Kurdistan regional government demands the right to administer. After Saddam was deposed, Kurdish forces under the control of Kurdistan's dominant party, the KDP, gained control of Sinjar. During this period, the KDP used its Peshmerga forces and the Asayish, which are Kurdistan's equivalent of secret police, to intimidate Yazidis who organized politically outside of the KDP, or who opposed joining with the Kurdistan region and who advocated for continued engagement with the central government of Baghdad. These Yazidis were targeted by KDP forces and personnel with discrimination, harassment, arrests, and jailings, tactics that resembled Ba'ath-era methods of political persecution. But many other Yazidis in Sinjar hoped that Kurdish authority might be better for the community than had been the case with Iraq's central government. These hopes were dashed when the Yazidi genocide occurred in 2014. Now, I have written about this at length, and I don't want to dwell on it for too long, but it's important to understand that what happened on August 3rd when the genocide began, the abandonment of the Yazidi people by the Kurdish Peshmerga forces, which allowed the genocide to take place, this is still very relevant to the political situation of the present. So it's important that we understand it. I'll just briefly explain the most important pieces. The Yazidis were abandoned by the Peshmerga in the early morning of the genocide, leaving them vulnerable to attack from IS jihadist forces. Kurdish government officials since that time have promoted the claim that they couldn't withstand the onslaught of the jihadists, and their front line broke, and they were forced to withdraw. This is a patent falsity. What happened was an organized collective withdrawal of all military forces in the early hours of the morning before the jihadists reached Sinjar. So they know that the jihadists are mobilizing. They know they're coming to the mountain. All the Yazidi communities are surround. And before everyone wakes up in the early hours of the morning, they pack up all their military equipment, all their weapons, all their military vehicles, and they leave with everything. The day before, Yazidis knew that the Islamic State was mobilizing, and they were terrified. And many of them tried to evacuate. And the Kurdish forces told them, "We will protect you. We are not leaving. We're here to keep you safe." And they even prevented families from evacuating. We have many survivor testimonies confirming this. Families with all their possessions, their children in their car, trying to leave on August 2nd, and being turned back to their towns by the Kurdish forces that are there to protect them, telling them, "You will be safe, you're not allowed to leave." And then, just after midnight, all those forces leave. They didn't even remain in order to facilitate the evacuation of the people. There was never an engagement with the enemy. Now, you can understand the kind of betrayal that would create in the hearts of the Yazidi people, and why, from that point forward, any hope that any of the people had shared that perhaps there was a future with Kurdistan was gone. And this is not going to change within at least the next 2 or 3 generations. It is irreparable. Since that time, the Yazidis have been very consistent with a single demand, that they be able to manage their own affairs in the administration of Sinjar, their own community, their own region, in the future, and not be dominated by an external political party. They have begged the international community in every front, UN agencies, every government that has participated in advocacy efforts, they have asked to have a local administration created within Sinjar that is part of Iraq, but that will be run by local, nonpartisan Yazidis who are not affiliated with these external parties with interests. However, the KDP, from that time until now, has continued to insist that it maintain control of Sinjar, KDP being the largest Kurdish political party. After the KDP pullout, the Peshmerga pullout, PKK forces came in from Turkey, Kurdish PKK forces from Turkey and Syria. They saved many Yazidi lives, helped the Yazidis in the frontline defense against the Islamic State. This created a competition where the KDP resented the PKK presence and was concerned that the PKK might gain ascendancy in Sinjar, supplanting and displacing KDP influence. That has led to now several years of very serious political and humanitarian forms of abuse and persecution of the Yazidis that has inhibited the resolution of this genocide and prevented the return of Yazidis to Sinjar. Instead of a contrite heart following the abandonment of the Yazidis, the reality instead has been one of increasing abuses. There are examples of this in your handout. I will go through a few quickly. A blockade was implemented that prevented Yazidis from bringing any supplies back to Sinjar that they needed to restart their lives. Reconstruction materials, school supplies for children, household furniture, foodstuffs, veterinary medicine, car parts, equipment for farms, for tractors, agricultural supplies, fuel, everything. At other times, Kurdish security prevented all Yazidi travel from the camps to Sinjar, meaning people couldn't even go to their homes. NGOs and humanitarian organizations have been frequently denied access to Sinjar, which has prevented humanitarian work and reconstruction. It's made reconstruction almost impossible, even though the north side of Sinjar Mountain has been slowly resettled by handfuls of Yazidis, even since the end of 2014. And these people have been asking for help for these years. This is why most of the Yazidis are staying in camps right now, because they know there's no real way for them to rebuild their lives in Sinjar. The KDP has prevented medicine, food aid, and other forms of relief from reaching Sinjar. Yazidis who hold demonstrations about these abuses are targeted with arrests, beatings, and other threats of violence. The KDP has shut down local Yazidi organizations, many of them, when members of those organizations have political alignments that don't match the objectives of the KDP party. There has also been political violence that's targeted Yazidis who align with non-KRG entities like the PKK, like Iraqi forces connected to the Hashtag. These are people fighting to defend their own homeland. They're fighting the Islamic State, and they're being persecuted for that because they're not doing it with the right political party. Party affiliation and not religious identity becomes your true sectarian identity or tribal affiliation. It's whether or not you belong to the party that has power. This is a very troubling situation. Many Yazidis have not been able to visit their families for over a year or more because they were not allowed to come back to the Kurdistan region and visit them if they were participating with another militia. I know of taxi drivers who have been arrested by the Asayish because they transported a fighter that belonged to a different militia, a non-KDP militia. And they were accused then of aiding this rival of the PKK, and they would be arrested and thrown in jail. Sometimes their taxi cars, their livelihood were taken away. This is the kind of thing that happens all the time. We can't spend a lot of time on all the examples. I want you to know that what I'm telling you tonight is the tip of the iceberg. This is nothing compared to what actually happens. After liberation of southern Yazidi villages in Sinjar were facilitated by forces aligned with Baghdad and the Hashtag, which the KDP resented. The KDP expelled civilian families from the displaced camps in the Kurdistan region, whose family members had joined with those militias to fight ISIS. And these civilians are thrown out of the camps. These are the camps we fund, that your government funds, my government funds, the UNHCR presides over. Human Rights Watch documented this. There is a lot more that is happening that is not documented. Now, it's uncomfortable to discuss these issues because Kurdish authorities maintain such close relations with the West, and they are viewed with great sympathy by us. In a lot of ways, that's legitimate. The Kurds suffered prior to 2003. They suffered under Saddam. It was wonderful when they experienced liberation after 2003, and they deserved our help. But since then, as is the case with many political interests, they have pursued an objective of expanding the territory that they want to annex to a future, possibly independent Kurdistan homeland. And this has targeted minority areas in very harmful ways. The Kurdish government does an excellent job of marketing itself to us. There was a diplomat, I don't know from which country, who said, most governments have a PR division, but the KRG is a PR firm with a government attached. And that's a very apt description of how this works. It was very difficult before 2014 to even say anything negative about Kurdish political abuses because nobody in Washington, where I was doing advocacy work, nobody would believe it. It has slowly changed over the past few years as people continue to talk about these problems. Now, if we shift for a moment to Baghdad, Baghdad has also committed a great crime against the Yazidi people, and that is neglect. The KDP lost its direct control over Sinjar in late 2017 when Sinjar was retaken by Iraqi forces. Since that time, there has not been a coherent administration for Sinjar. There's a position called Qai Maqam, people translate it as mayor. It's basically the district head who's responsible for authorizing NGOs to perform humanitarian work, responsible for any projects that happen. This role has not been clearly filled by Baghdad. They have just ignored this problem. It's unbelievable. In close to 2 years, Baghdad has taken no steps to address the need for administrative and security institutions. instead effectively abandoning Sinjar to a state of indefinite administrative uncertainty. This neglect would be a problem even if it occurred within one of Iraq's Muslim majority districts that had not experienced this violence. But this is happening in the district of a vulnerable community that has just gone through genocide. This is unacceptable. Recently, in just a 2-month period, Baghdad got rid of the Nineveh governor. This is a much higher position than the head of a district. And then replaced him. But they have taken no action on Sinjar. The point is they could if they wanted to. Sinjar is the only district in Iraq with this level of administrative ambiguity. There's been no help from the Iraqi education or health ministries to bring teachers and doctors back to Sinjar. Absolutely no steps have been taken to help people return to Sinjar. This genocide has produced the first Iraqi Nobel Peace Prize winner, Nadia Murad. And yet the central government of Iraq remains so negligent, it will not resolve the administrative ambiguity that keeps Sinjar so vulnerable. This is the definition of deplorable. It is unconscionable. And Western countries share this blame because we have influence in Iraq and Kurdistan. We provide them with tremendous financial support, weapons, and aid. But despite our verbal professions to care about the Yazidis following their genocide, we have apparently not presented the resolution of this problem as one of our true priorities. Instead, the indecisive, hesitant behavior of the international community on this issue delays the creation of a stable solution for the Yazidis. So today, I am proposing that we change this by creating an international commission for Sinjar, the purpose of which would be to work with Baghdad to create nonpartisan local administration in Sinjar through which the Yazidis can manage their affairs and security without being subjected to intimidation and coercion from powerful Kurdish political parties. Now, the idea here is for a country like this one, could be alone, could be in conjunction with several other countries that have Yazidi populations like Germany, US, Canada, whoever, make an agreement with Baghdad where Baghdad consents to have a team come work in Iraq and facilitate interaction between Sinjar and the central government to resolve these administrative ambiguities and fix this problem so that people can go home. It may be that Baghdad would welcome this because they are overstretched, they are focused on all the problems they experience in the south, they neglect minority-rich areas in the north, they may not have the expertise to deal with this, it may just not be a priority. They may welcome what I'm proposing. I'm not talking about a coercive pressure applied by the West. Some pressure would be necessary for accountability, but I'm also talking about a supportive role. Now, Western governments want to throw money at humanitarian relief and then tell themselves, we've done our part. And in the Yazidi situation, humanitarian aid does not fix anything. It is merely damage control. The systemic fundamental issues that produce the problem remain in place. Now, I believe there's no reason for a lack of appetite for the type of commission that I'm describing within our countries. It would be far less expensive than the many millions that are now being spent on aid. The main impediment is probably that such an undertaking requires highly specialized knowledge and expertise, but a team of qualified experts could be created to handle this task. The reality, though, is that our officials like to do photo ops with Nadia Murad, but don't really feel the need to see that a real solution for the Yazidis is carried through. And that is why you have to pressure them to make a solution become reality. Often Western countries avoid involvement with internal affairs of other countries because it might resemble colonial meddling. But this is not an acceptable excuse when it comes to the Yazidi situation, which largely resulted from the instability that our countries created when we invaded in 2003. Think about this. It's okay to invade Iraq as part of a coalition in 2003, effect regime change and depose a government, preside over the crafting of a new constitution and the creation of a new administration. That's somehow not colonial action. But to get involved with the instability produced by the mess we created in the country and help resolve a small local political conflict in Sinjar, that's state building and therefore unacceptable. That's neo-colonialism. During the British Mandate, when the British ruled Iraq in the early 20th century, they used the Yazidis in their forces. They created Iraq levies, and they had Iraq levies for the Yazidis. So they exploited the Yazidis to help police the country and create order. And then when the Constitution of Iraq was created in 1925, and the British presided over the development of the first administrations, they did not in any way guarantee that the Yazidis were included as part of the state system or recognized by state institutions or the legal framework, all of which they supervised. They basically neglected to take care of the people that they had used when they were there. The Americans did the same thing after 2003. The Yazidi community gave us hundreds of their young people to serve as our translators, and yours, because you were with us. The Yazidi community thought that they would be securing a better future for themselves if they helped the occupier, and the Americans trusted them, the coalition trusted them, because they knew Yazidis weren't going to be terrorists. Not a single coalition soldier died during the Iraq War at the hands of a Yazidi, not one. So these foreign occupying powers, us, we exploited the Yazidis again. We took advantage of their labor. We used hundreds of them to serve as our translators. And now we effectively abandon them when they have an administrative crisis that is creating vulnerability for them. It's just like what happened in the early 20th century during the British Mandate. Instead, we end up validating the very actors that impede the development of democratic norms in the country. For example, when Western government officials visit Kurdistan and do photo ops with KDP-appointed officials that the KDP has installed to administer disputed territories that they're unilaterally claiming the right to rule. And we send our government personnel over there, and they stand there next to this so-called mayor, oblivious of the needs of the local people or desires of the local people, and they validate this. Western governments empower a hegemonic single-party system like the KDP through the provision of weapons, training, official recognition, and public events that feature KDP political appointees as the legitimate representatives of disputed territories. This constitutes the action on the part of external international players who claim to avoid internal meddling that serves to prop up internal political players that ends up determining the outcome of the internal dispute. How is that not colonial action? While helping to resolve the dispute in the favor of the actual beneficiaries, the local people, would be colonial action. I'm about to finish. I want to talk for a moment about some concerns that might be raised in your minds about the idea of an international commission for Sinjar. When we talk about self-determination for an ethno-religious community that lives in part of the country, some people have little warning bells that go off. After the wars in Yugoslavia and the Bosnian genocide in the 1990s, many people developed concerns about a state's provision of group autonomy for a given group, fearing that this might escalate the demands of other groups or even destabilize the state. But self-determination is today considered by many jurists to be a fundamental norm of international law. Researchers who have developed extensive data sets on ethnic and religious group inclusion in the governments of over 160 countries have shown that group territorial autonomy can in fact prevent civil conflict. The right to be territorially self-determined within the state itself is emerging as a norm, and one that is supported by customary international law as well as municipal law. For example, almost all developed nations' electoral laws or boundary commissions recognize communities of interest in determining electoral districts, and there are many examples of autonomy arrangements for minorities in other countries around the world. In fact, according to the ACE project, which is the world's largest electoral law database, it was launched by the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, 35% of countries have some type of electoral district delineation formula that considers communities of interest. This figure doesn't even include Belgium, Italy, and India, who also consider communities of interest. So many countries that don't outright recognize ethno-religious autonomy still recognize that geographically concentrated, distinct ethno-religious communities have an interest in casting ballots for members of their group in homogeneous electoral districts. Now, for Sinjar, what this would look like would be a creation of a governorate within Iraq's existing system of governance. This is not a secessionist idea. Iraq has, the whole country is divided by governance, the way the US is divided by states, or Canada has provinces. We're talking about creating a governorate for the Yazidi majority area of Sinjar. This would be akin to local administration for any township, city, county. If we have a small town in rural England or Oregon, where I'm from, their local policy isn't dictated by New York. Why should life in Sinjar be dictated by Erbil? It's very sensible. Sinjar's affairs should be governed by its local people, and a Sinjar governor is an essential and necessary prerequisite for Yazidis to realize their right to participate freely in political processes in Iraq. And this is a right recognized under international law and under multiple provisions of the Iraqi constitution. Thank you very much. And I will stay as long as you want to talk about this. The Q&A is scheduled for a half an hour. I'll stay here all night as long as somebody wants to keep talking about these issues.